The night Draven Ashford lost his mate, he lost his voice for softness too. That was 5 years ago, and in all that time, no one in the kingdom of Voss Hollow had seen him smile, laugh, or so much as raise his hand in greeting to a child. He ruled with a discipline so sharp that even his most loyal generals lowered their eyes when he walked past. The packs called him the Iron Alpha. Some said his heart had frozen the day his mate, Lyra, was killed defending the northern border. Others whispered that he no longer had a heart to freeze, that it had been buried with her. Whatever the truth, Draven had built his entire life around control. He ate at the same hour every day. He trained at dawn, reviewed reports until midnight, and never allowed a single unscheduled moment into his calendar. His advisors respected him, his soldiers feared him. And the kingdom, though it prospered under his firm hand, had grown quiet and careful, the way a home grows quiet when laughter has been gone too long. It was his beta, a steady, graying wolf named Corwin, who reminded him of the obligation he could not avoid. "The orphanage dedication is this afternoon," Corwin said, setting a folder on the king's desk. "Lyra funded its construction herself, before she passed. The builders have finished the east wing. They are expecting you to cut the ribbon." Draven did not look up from his papers. "Send a representative." "My lord, the people expect you. It was her project. If you do not attend, it will be seen as disrespect to her memory, not merely absence." That struck a nerve, as Corwin knew it would. Draven set down his pen, jaw tightening. "Fine. 1 hour. No speeches beyond what is written for me." "Understood, my lord." By mid-afternoon, the king's carriage rolled through the gates of the newly finished orphanage, a modest stone building, with ivy already creeping along its walls, exactly the kind of place Lyra would have loved. She had always spoken of children who had no pack, no family, no one to claim them, and she had insisted that Voss Hollow do better by them. Draven remembered her voice when she spoke of it, warm and certain, the voice of someone who believed the world could be kinder if you simply built the right doors for it. He stepped out of the carriage into a small courtyard lined with staff and caretakers, all bowing low. A row of children stood at the front, dressed in their best clothes, nervous excitement flickering across their faces. Draven barely glanced at them. He had learned, over the years, not to look too closely at children. It reminded him of futures that would never belong to him. The head caretaker, an elderly wolf named Mabel, greeted him with trembling hands. "Your Majesty, we are honored. The Queen's vision lives on in these walls. Every child here has a bed, a meal, and lessons because of what she began." Draven nodded stiffly. She would be pleased. He moved through the prepared remarks quickly, his voice flat and practiced, thanking the builders, praising the caretakers, promising continued support from the crown. The nobles in attendance clapped politely. The children clapped too, though most of them were only imitating the adults, too young to understand the importance of the man standing before them. All except one. Near the end of the line stood a small girl, no older than 5, with unusually pale eyes the color of morning frost. Her hair was dark and unruly, escaping its ribbon in soft waves. She had been listening to every word Draven said, tilting her head slightly, watching him the way one watches something familiar, trying to remember why it feels that way. Her name was Wren. She had been found as an infant near the northern border, wrapped in a cloak too fine for an abandoned child, with no note, no family, no explanation. The caretakers had raised her on stories, the way orphanages often did, tales of a brave queen who protected her people, and a king who ruled with quiet strength beneath his stern exterior. Mabel had told those stories to every child who passed through these halls, but Wren had always asked for them twice. As Draven finished his remarks, and the polite applause faded, Mabel began ushering the children back toward the building for their afternoon meal. It was meant to be a simple exit, the kind of quiet transition that ends every royal visit without incident. But Wren did not move with the others. She stared at Draven for a long moment, something clicking into place behind her frost-pale eyes. Then, before any caretaker could reach for her hand, before any guard could step forward, she broke from the line and ran. Gasps rippled through the courtyard. A guard lunged to intercede, but Draven raised a hand without thinking, an instinct faster than command, and the guard froze mid-step. Ren reached him in seconds, small arms wrapping around his leg with the full, uncomplicated strength of a child who trusted completely. She pressed her cheek against the fabric of his coat and looked up at him with a smile that held no fear at all. "Father," she said, clear and certain, as though she had been waiting years to say it. The courtyard went utterly silent. Nobles exchanged startled glances. Caretakers pressed their hands to their mouths. Guards did not know whether to step forward or stand down. No one in Voss Hollow had touched the king in years, let alone a child, let alone claimed him with a word so intimate it seemed to belong to another life entirely. Draven stood frozen, staring down at the small girl clinging to his leg. He should have stepped back. He should have summoned a caretaker to correct the mistake and remove her gently. That was what protocol demanded, what 5 years of careful discipline had trained him to do. Instead, something in his chest, something buried so deep he had stopped believing it still existed, cracked wide open. He knelt. It was such a small motion, and yet it seemed to shake the courtyard more than any decree he had ever issued. The Iron Alpha, the king who never bent, lowered himself to meet a child's eyes. Up close, he could see it, the resemblance that had likely drawn her to him in the first place. Her eyes were nearly identical to Lyra's, the same pale frost color, the same quiet intensity. It was impossible, he told himself. Lyra had died childless, and yet the resemblance was undeniable, striking enough to steal the breath from his lungs. "Why did you call me that?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Ren did not seem troubled by the question. She answered as though it were obvious. "Mabel says the king and queen built this house so children like me would have a family. She says the queen had eyes like mine. She says the king is strong but kind underneath, even if he forgets to show it." She reached up and touched his cheek with small fingers. "You looked sad. I thought maybe you needed someone to remind you." Draven could not speak. Around him, the courtyard remained frozen, no one daring to break the moment, uncertain whether they were witnessing an outburst of royal fury waiting to happen, or something else entirely, something none of them had words for. Mabel stepped forward carefully, wringing her hands. "Your Majesty, forgive her. She is young. She does not understand." "She understands more than most grown wolves in this courtyard," Draven said quietly, still looking at Ren. He studied her a moment longer, memory tugging at him with quiet insistence. 5 years ago, in the chaos following the border ambush that took Lyra's life, there had been reports, quickly buried beneath grief and war preparations, of a child found abandoned near that same border only weeks later. He had been too consumed by loss at the time to give it any real attention. It had seemed an unrelated tragedy, one among many in a difficult season. Now, kneeling before this girl with Lyra's eyes, the coincidence felt too precise to ignore. "Tell me," he said gently, "do you know anything about how you came to be here?" "Anything at all?" Ren shook her head. "Only that I was very small. Mabel found me wrapped in a soft blue cloak. She still has it. She says it was too fine for an ordinary family, that maybe I came from somewhere important." Draven's jaw tightened. Lyra had worn a blue traveling cloak the night she left, to defend the border, a cloak she had never returned wearing. He had assumed, in the chaos of the ambush, that it had been lost or destroyed. He had never once considered that it might have been used to protect something, someone, before the end. He rose slowly, keeping Ren's small hand in his own, and turned to Corwin, who stood nearby looking as stunned as everyone else. "I want every record from 5 years ago pertaining to the northern border incident reviewed again," Draven said. "Every report, every witness statement, everything filed regarding a child found abandoned in that region." Corwin nodded quickly. "At once, my lord." Draven crouched again to Ren's level. "I cannot promise you answers today, but I intend to find them. And until I do, and long after, I do not intend to leave you here." Ren's eyes widened. "You mean it?" "I do not say things I do not mean," Draven said, and for the first time in 5 years, something close to warmth touched his voice. Mabel stepped forward, overwhelmed. "Your Majesty, this is an extraordinary decision. The council will have questions. An heir of unconfirmed lineage, taken in so suddenly." "She is not unconfirmed," Draven said firmly, though privately he acknowledged the investigation had only just begun. She is under the protection of the crown as of this moment. The council may raise their concerns to me directly. I will address every one of them." Behind him, murmurs rippled through the gathered nobles, some scandalized, some visibly moved. A few of the older wolves, who remembered Lyra well, wiped quiet tears from their eyes, seeing in this small, stubborn moment something they thought had died with her. That evening, as Draven carried a sleepy wren through the halls of the castle toward the chambers hastily prepared for her, Corwin walked alongside him, still processing the day's events. "You realize this will change everything," Corwin said carefully. "The court, the succession, the political balance. There will be wolves who challenge her place, who question your judgment." "Let them," Draven said simply. "I have spent 5 years governing with my head and nothing else. Perhaps it is time I remembered why any of it mattered in the first place." Corwin studied him for a long moment, then allowed himself a small, rare smile. Lyra would be glad to see this. "I know," Draven said quietly, glancing down at the small girl now fast asleep against his shoulder, her breathing slow and even, her small hand still curled into the fabric of his coat, as though she feared he might disappear if she let go. "I believe she already has." In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Wren's origins would uncover fragments of truth Draven had never expected, evidence suggesting that Lyra, in her final hours, had chosen protection over survival, hiding a child from enemies who sought to use innocent lives as leverage in the war along the border. The full story would take time to piece together, and some details would remain forever lost to that terrible night. But none of it changed what mattered most. Voss Hollow, a kingdom that had grown accustomed to its king's cold silence, began to change too. Slowly, the halls of the castle filled with a child's laughter for the first time in years. Advisors who once tiptoed around Draven's temper found him pausing in meetings to glance toward the door, listening for small footsteps. Guards who once stood rigid and unspeaking found themselves smiling at a little girl who insisted on greeting each of them by name. And Draven himself, the wolf the kingdom had called the Iron Alpha, discovered that his heart had not frozen after all. It had simply been waiting, quiet and patient, for someone brave enough to reach through the cold and remind him it was still there. It had taken only one word, spoken without hesitation before an entire court, to do what nothing else could. A single word from a small girl who asked for nothing but a family. Father. And in that moment, Draven Ashford, King of Voss Hollow, had finally come home to himself.